The air smelled like ocean salt and lemon cleaner, 2 scents I'd never wanted near anything labeled bridal. But that's what greeted me when I walked into my mother's living room 1 week before my wedding. The house was full, but it felt like I'd shown up uninvited. Cressida sat on the cream leather couch, legs crossed like a senator waiting on a press conference. Avon leaned against the doorway with a folder in hand, her manicured finger tapping the edge of it like a metronome. I hadn't even set my purse down when Avon handed it to me. "Everything's set," she said, not even pretending it was a conversation. I opened the folder. Venue, locked, florals, finalized, color scheme, dusty rose and gold, Avon's college sorority colors, not mine. Even the playlist for the reception had been picked out, jazz, Motown, and one bizarre choice of Taylor Swift's Bejeweled as the final dance. "Wait," I said slowly, thumbing through the timeline. "You already signed off everything without me?" My mother didn't even glance up from her tea. "You've been too busy. We handled it." "We thought you'd be relieved," Avon added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're welcome." My jaw clenched as I flipped to the guest list. I scanned down the rows of names and froze. My fiancé's name was printed perfectly. Middle name, suffix, everything in order. Mine, it was spelled Zinnia, a typo so subtle it looked intentional. I looked at Cressida. She blinked slowly, stirring her tea. "It's a community celebration, sweetheart. It's not just about you." Something in my chest shifted. Not broke, but turned, like a door swinging on old hinges. I swallowed the sharp edge in my throat and said nothing. I smiled, nodded, and requested a printed copy of the itinerary for my records. Later that night, I read every line of that document like it was a contract I never signed. And maybe I hadn't, but I was learning to read between the lines. Every misstep, every erasure, every choice made without me was a sentence in a larger story, a story I wasn't the protagonist of. The next morning, we did a walkthrough at the beachside resort. It was early, before the fog had lifted. The planner, Indira, was already setting up diagrams with tape and measuring wheels. She greeted me with a warm smile, but I could tell she was tired, probably from dealing with Avon. I walked the perimeter of the tent. It was lovely, I had to admit. Clean white linens, rattan chairs, soft florals. But the placement of my father's honorary seat, a small photo of him beside a single white rose, was tucked far in the corner near the staff table. I motioned to Indira. "Do you think we could move my dad's seat to the front row? He's not here, but I want it to feel like he's still part of this." Before Indira could respond, Avon's voice cut through the tent. "This whole thing already looks like a poor wedding. You want to move a ghost chair front and center?" Some of her bridesmaid friends snorted. One of them whispered something about Etsy vibes. I stared at her for a moment. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just turned away and walked toward Indira, who stood frozen, lips parted. "Can I get a full itemized breakdown of the event costs?" I asked quietly. Indira blinked, then nodded. "Of course. I'll email it tonight." I didn't return to the resort after that. Later, while sitting on the floor of my small apartment with the master guest list open on my laptop, I noticed a note next to several names. Removed by Mom. 6 of them. All mine. Leora, Emma. Greg from my first job. Even Miss Darlene, my old high school teacher who'd mailed a handwritten RSVP. I stared at those notes, my screen dimming after 5 minutes of inactivity. I didn't touch the mouse. Didn't blink. They weren't just ignoring me anymore, they were erasing me. I spent the better part of that night scrolling through names, trying to make sense of the list I was supposedly at the center of. 6 names were gone. Not forgotten. Just removed. Leora called the next morning. Her voice was chipper, the way it always was when she was trying not to sound hurt. "Hey, just checking. Did my invite get lost in the mail? I know the post office is a mess these days, but it's been weeks." I paused mid-pour, the coffee splashing slightly onto the counter. I steadied my hand and forced a laugh. "That's weird. You were absolutely on the list," I said, lying like it was a second language. After we hung up, I didn't even bother emailing the planner. I drove straight to my mother's house, printout in hand, stomach tight with a mix of dread and knowing. Cressida was in the kitchen arranging her china. She said it helped her feel grounded, as if porcelain could substitute empathy. I laid the list on the table between us. These names, I pointed, Leora, Emma, Darlene, they're gone. She didn't even look up. They didn't fit the aesthetic. Nothing personal. That phrase? I've never hated two words more. Nothing personal. Like the way a store posts no return signs after you've bought the wrong size, as if that makes it less frustrating. You cut my guests, I said evenly. Her gaze met mine then. Calm, rehearsed. You've already got plenty of people coming. We wanted to maintain a certain tone. It's not about you, it's about the family. There it was again. That word, family. Their version of it always seemed to exclude me while still expecting my participation. I heard my therapist's voice in my head, soft but firm. You're not crazy. They're just very good at making you feel like you are. And I believed her more in that moment than I ever had. I drove home slowly, gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. Back at my place, I found the original spreadsheet Indira had emailed and compared it to the printed one from my mother. The edits were clean, efficient, sanitized. 3 hours later, I was standing in the resort lobby, eyeing the welcome sign that had just been delivered. It read, "The Bridging of Families. Avon Cressida celebrate Zinnia's journey." I stood there longer than anyone should have stared at a foam board. I felt the resort's air conditioning on the back of my neck, but I didn't move. Indira walked over, holding a wedding program in her hand. She handed it to me with a cautious smile, as if passing along something radioactive. I opened it and saw my name, small, italicized, listed below. Host, Mrs. Cressida Martin, and event visionary, Avon Martin. I held it up to her without saying a word. She exhaled. The family insisted on a hierarchy. I assumed it was intentional. Even on paper, I whispered, I'm an afterthought. She looked like she wanted to say more, but I turned and walked out, wedding program still in hand. I didn't crumble it, didn't throw it. I slid it gently into my purse like a document I might need later in court. Back home, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the kitchen sink. The light was soft, dusk seeping through the blinds. I unfolded the list again, ran my finger over the column that read, "Removed by Mom." The font was so standard, so unbothered by the weight it carried. Removed, like a sticker peeled off clean. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd reclassified me. I arrived before anyone else. The ocean fog still hung low around the cliffs, and the wind carried that cool, damp scent only Santa Barbara mornings had. Indira met me near the back lawn where the rehearsal chairs had just started to line up. She held a coffee in one hand and an iPad in the other. They wanted to preview the slideshow on site, she said quietly, just to make sure transitions flow properly. I nodded, following her into the tent. The projector flickered to life, casting light onto the fabric screen. I stood a few steps back, arms folded, coffee untouched. The first slide, a family portrait, Cressida, Avon, extended cousins. I wasn't in it. The second, Avon's college graduation. The third, a childhood birthday party with Avon blowing out the candles. I recognized the backyard. It was mine, but I wasn't in that photo either. Is this the bridal montage? I asked. Indira hesitated, glancing toward the screen. They wanted it to focus on family leadership. That's how they phrased it. Family leadership. I nearly laughed. A photo finally flashed across showing me, barely, cropped on the edge of a group shot, my face half hidden behind someone's shoulder. They had access to hundreds of pictures, I said, voice steady. They picked this. Indira didn't defend them. She just stood there, silent, as the slideshow faded to black and restarted. I thanked her for showing me and walked out before anyone else arrived. Later that afternoon, after I'd driven around town just to cool my nerves, Indira called and asked if we could talk. I met her outside the venue, in her parked car overlooking the hillside. She handed me a manila folder through the window. I wasn't supposed to give this to you, she said, but I can't keep pretending it's fine. Inside was the draft for the thank you note they planned to place in every guest's welcome bag. It began with, "We are deeply grateful for your presence and support during this momentous occasion." It continued for 3 paragraphs, listing names to thank. Avon's, of course. My mother's, naturally. Even a distant cousin who once planned a baby shower. Mine was not there. I read it twice. My name wasn't forgotten. It had been deliberately left out. I turned the paper over, stared at the blank back, then slowly laughed. "They didn't forget me," I murmured. "They assigned me silence." Indira shifted in her seat. "I should have caught this. I'm sorry. I assumed you'd approved it." "You can't miss someone they already removed," I said. "It's like sending a thank you note to a ghost." The folder stayed in my lap for a long while. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I just sat there, tracing the edge of the paper with my thumb. After a few minutes, I folded the draft in half and tucked it into my purse. I wasn't going to confront anyone, not today. I didn't need another performance, another scene where they got to pretend they were confused or "so sorry you feel that way." I wasn't going to play the emotional translator anymore. From the car, I could see across the resort garden. Avon was standing near the fountain, laughing while a photographer took candid shots of her arranging centerpieces like she'd been the mastermind behind it all. Her gestures were theatrical, perfectly timed. A few staffers stood off to the side, watching politely. She didn't see me watching her. Or maybe she did, and didn't care. Either way, I watched as she fixed her hair in the reflection of the fountain and whispered something that made the photographer laugh. In that moment, it hit me. They weren't just erasing memories, they were drafting a new story, and I was never meant to be part of the script. The bridal suite smelled like hairspray and tension. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, illuminating the racks of silk and tulle along the wall. I was early, again. Indira greeted me with a hesitant smile, eyes flicking to the garment rack before she even said hello. "There's a change," she began carefully, motioning toward the corner of the room where a dress stood displayed like a trophy. It wasn't mine. The gown I had chosen was soft, classic, minimal. The one in front of me was nothing short of a red carpet statement, form-fitting, backless, with rhinestone shoulders and a slit so high it needed its own NDA. Draped over the hanger, a card hung from a satin ribbon. In loopy gold handwriting, it read, "This one makes you look more like a bride." Avon. I blinked. Once? Twice? Indira's voice dropped. "There was a swap order from your mother. I thought you signed off." I stepped closer, hands still at my sides. The fabric shimmered under the lights. It looked expensive. It looked intentional. "I didn't sign my name away," I said, voice low but steady. A bridal stylist walked in, arms full of accessories. She paused mid-step when she saw me and the look on my face. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I simply said, "Put it back in the bag." She glanced at Indira, unsure. I repeated myself. With slow, careful movements, the stylist removed the dress from the mannequin and returned it to its garment bag. I didn't need to try it on to know it wasn't mine. I sat down on the ottoman, pulled my phone from my purse, and started writing a note. Not to them, to myself. Just a list. What I'd paid for, what I hadn't agreed to, what I refused to compromise next. This wasn't about lace or silhouettes anymore. It was about being overwritten in real time. A few hours later, I found a shaded bench in the corner of the hotel garden. It was quiet, away from the floral chaos and clipboard-wielding staff. I needed to breathe. As I scrolled through my messages, a new RSVP update pinged into my inbox. It listed the latest confirmed attendees. Aiden's name caught my eye. Aiden, my ex-boyfriend from college. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. He was charming back then, sure, but our breakup wasn't clean. He was invited. I didn't remember adding him. In fact, I was certain I hadn't. I checked again, scrolled through the column for who had submitted his invitation. Guest added by Cressida. Of course. I reached for my phone and texted my dad. "Just so you know, Aiden's invited. I wasn't told." A moment passed, then 2. No reply. Instead, I opened the file of my original guest list, the one with my mentor, Miss Bailey, on it. She wasn't a blood relative, but she was the closest thing I had to a second mother. I had asked, twice, to include her. Each time, I was told the list was too full. Apparently, there was room for Aiden, but not for the woman who helped me pay for college when my own family turned their backs. I thought of something Michelle Obama once said, "When they go low, we go high." But this wasn't just low, this was subterranean. I spent the rest of the afternoon in that garden corner, watching as staff adjusted floral arrangements, as Avon posed in her white jumpsuit for behind-the-scenes photos like she was the face of a campaign and I was the product. I didn't go back to the suite. I didn't call anyone. I returned to my room quietly, locked the door, and pulled out the folded sketch of the dress I'd originally picked, the one with a square neckline and covered buttons down the back, the one I fought to keep simple, clean, mine. I laid it flat on the pillow. I wasn't going to wear the dress they chose, but I wasn't giving it back either. The dinner reception was meant to be simple. That's what I'd been told. Just something intimate for close family. Yet by the time I walked into the tent, it looked more like a televised gala than a private gathering. Strings of warm Edison bulbs glowed above a long, ornate table, flanked by floral towers. It was the kind of setting people posted with the caption, "Blessed beyond words." I arrived late on purpose. Not because I wanted to make a statement, but because I wanted the buffer of arriving unnoticed. Avon noticed anyway. "There she is," she called out as I stepped into the entryway. "Just in time." My stomach twisted, but I smiled. Politely. The kind of smile you offer when you've already calculated the emotional cost of staying silent. As dinner began, Cressida floated between tables like a socialite hosting a charity ball, cheeks kissed, wine glasses clinked. My chair was wedged between a distant cousin I hadn't seen in 8 years and a neighbor who once reported our mailbox being too close to hers. I looked around for Valora, my fiancé. He was at another table, Avon's table. She sat next to him, laughing at something he'd said, one hand resting lightly on his arm, like they were starring in a Hallmark movie. I scanned the place cards again, heart sinking. Indira passed behind me as she checked floral arrangements and whispered, "Your seating got shifted last minute. I tried to flag it." Before I could ask more, Avon clinked her glass. "I just wanted to say a few words," she began, rising gracefully. The crowd quieted. The DJ lowered the music. "This wedding," she said, pausing for dramatic effect, "has been a labor of love, and tonight I want to thank the people who made it all happen." She started with the florist, then the catering team. A shout out to the bartender who nailed the signature cocktails. She named the lighting technician and the calligrapher for the place cards. She thanked Indira twice. "And of course," she continued, voice softening, "to our mother, Cressida, who carried this entire production on her shoulders. This is the wedding I always dreamed she'd have. And now, she finally gets to live it through Zinnia." Laughter. Eyes. Someone let out a high-pitched, "Aw." My wine sat untouched, the stem of the glass cold in my hand. I blinked a few times, watching the reflection of the lights dance on the surface of the table. She hadn't said my name, not once, not even a "thank you for saying yes." Cressida beamed like royalty. Avon curtsied playfully. People ate it up. When the applause died down, I leaned toward Indira and murmured, "Do I even have a chair in this family?" She glanced at me, then looked away quickly. "You might have to make one." I didn't respond. I simply stood and excused myself from the table. Outside, the air was thick with coastal fog. The lights from the tent blurred through the haze, casting soft halos that made the evening feel otherworldly. I stepped out of my heels and walked barefoot across the dewy grass until I reached the edge of the garden. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. No poetry, no diary entry. Just 4 words I typed without hesitation. "I'm reclaiming my place." The morning after the reception, the resort smelled like overwatered roses and burnt coffee. I wasn't supposed to be there. At least not in that wing. Not during the private thank you brunch Avon had organized for immediate family. But I had walked the garden early, needing space, and ended up on the path behind the reception hall. Voices filtered out through open terrace doors. Laughter. Glasses clinking. Avon's voice rose above the rest. This one's from a dear family friend, she said, holding up the baccarat crystal set like it was an award. And the espresso machine? Can you believe it? That friend really gets me. I stopped cold. The baccarat set had arrived in a box I signed for myself 2 weeks earlier. The espresso machine? I'd spent 2 hours on the phone sorting out the shipping delay because they were out of the rose gold model. I had picked every item based on Avon's absurd wish list. Every gift, paid in full with my card. I stepped back from the door, swallowing the familiar dry ache behind my tongue. She hadn't even changed the gift tags. She had just changed the narrative. Even my generosity, I whispered to myself, was repackaged under someone else's name. I didn't go in. I didn't confront her. I returned to my room, shut the door, and stared at the silent blank TV for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and began scrolling through my financial dashboard. Every transaction was still there. Every item, every deposit, every floral arrangement I'd fronted because Avon was too overwhelmed to deal with vendors. And then my phone buzzed. A message from Indira. "Can we talk? Something you need to see." 10 minutes later, I met her in the back office, tucked behind the main ballroom. She didn't even sit down, just turned her screen toward me. "I got this forwarded by accident," she said. "It's a promo draft from one of the boutique partners your sister is connected with." Look, it was a mock-up for an email campaign titled Modern Brides, Real Love. There were 5 featured photos. One of them was me, in the original dress I refused to wear, hair swept up, bouquet in hand, laughing off to the side as if the day had been mine. "Why is my face on a campaign I never agreed to?" I asked, voice tight. Indira looked uncomfortable. "Apparently, the photographer said you signed a model release through your packet, but I never saw one. I would have flagged it." I stared at the screen. Beneath my photo, the caption read, "Styled by Seraphine Bridal, worn by Avon Martin's sister, wedding of the year." "They trademarked me," I said. "They literally turned me into a prop." Indira's voice dropped. "Do you want me to say something?" "No," I said calmly. "I'll handle it." Back in my suite, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, not from the gift machine, but from the old French press I brought myself. I sat at the small desk facing the window, where a slice of the Pacific sparkled through the early light. Then I went to work. I opened a new folder on my desktop, labeled it Receipts. One by one, I exported every invoice I had paid for this wedding, from the bridesmaid's slippers to the security deposit on the sound system. The proof was there, neat, time-stamped, irrefutable. When I was done, I printed everything and slipped the papers into a manila envelope. On the front, I wrote, "For the record, this is mine." I sealed it. Then I slid it beneath the edge of the mirror, just where I'd see it again in the morning. Because no one gets to rename what they didn't build. The wedding morning should have felt sacred, quiet, a moment to collect myself before everything began. Instead, it started with a call from Lyora. Her voice was low, cautious. "I'm here," she said, "but, Zinnia, we're seated by the portable restrooms, the actual line of toilets." My fingers clenched around my coffee mug. "What?" "Yeah, I thought maybe we were just early and they were filling in." "No," I interrupted, grabbing the guest map I'd reviewed with Indira a week earlier. I hadn't seen final placements since then, but I remembered clearly where I'd asked for Lyora to be. Center left, close to the stage, near me. I found Cressida in the makeup tent. She was getting her hair touched up, sipping champagne in a silk robe like she was the bride. "They didn't RSVP on time," she said, adjusting her necklace in the mirror. "We had to prioritize people who responded quickly. It's not personal." I stared at her. They replied the day after invites went out. "You approved the list. You shook Lyora's hand at the welcome dinner." She raised an eyebrow, unconcerned. "Seating is limited. Be grateful they're seated at all." I turned away before I said something I couldn't take back. Outside, I caught up with Lyora and the rest of my friends. They stood awkwardly, backs against the hedge line, their heels sinking into soft dirt, the hum of restroom generators behind them. "I feel like a prop," Lyora whispered, "not a guest." That's when it clicked. That's exactly what we were. All of us, props in someone else's story. Disposable. The ceremony started on time. Classical strings swelled as the sun burned off the morning fog. The air was hot and dry by the time we reached the post-ceremony moments, those branded snapshots orchestrated for Avon's carefully curated image. I was told to stand behind the stage for a brief break while the planner set up the bouquet toss. Indira met me near the back. "Small update," she said cautiously. "The bouquet toss has been pre-assigned." I blinked. "What?" "Avon arranged it with your mom. It's going directly to Talia." Talia, Avon's influencer friend who had just finalized a brand deal with a luxury wedding chain. She wasn't even in a relationship. "So I'm not tossing it at all?" I asked. "No," Indira said quietly. "It's a surprise activation. They're calling it an engagement prophecy moment. It'll go viral." I didn't say a word, just walked toward the bar and poured myself a drink. No one followed. Except Indira. "This is out of hand," she murmured, standing beside me. "It's not a wedding," I replied, watching the photographers circle Talia like she was the main event. "It's a brand launch." The worst part? No one looked uncomfortable. Not Cressida, not Avon, not even Valora, who had once told me he hated staged events. Everyone played along like it was scripted. Because it was. And me? I was the one still trying to live in something real. Back at my table, I reached for my purse and pulled out the envelope I'd sealed the night before, the one labeled, "For the record, this is mine." I slid it under a folded napkin. No grand gesture, no announcement, just quiet defiance in plain sight. They didn't want a bride. They wanted a body in a dress. 30 minutes before the dinner was set to begin, Indira found me outside the tent. I was standing near the edge of the terrace, pretending to admire the view of the ocean, but really just buying time before I had to go back in. She didn't say my name, just tapped my wrist lightly and held out her phone. "If you want this to stop," she whispered, "I need your permission to show them." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. My eyes met hers, and I gave the smallest nod of my life. She walked off with calm purpose, not looking back. 10 minutes later, just as guests were being seated and waiters started pouring wine, the house lights dimmed and the main screen, meant to play a romantic reel of Avon and Valora's love story, lit up with something entirely different. Slide 1. The venue deposit. Paid by Zinnia. Slide 2. Florals, design, chair rentals. Paid by Zinnia. Slide 3. Custom signage. Paid by Zinnia. Slide 4. The Baccarat gift set. Paid by Zinnia. There was no music, no narration, just white text, black background, dollar figures, invoice headers, a silent slideshow of truth. It took about 3 slides before the murmuring started. Wait, she paid for all that? No way. Is this real? Phones lit up, heads turned. Some people looked at Cressida. Others whispered toward Avon, who had frozen halfway through her glass of champagne. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the screen like it was glitching. Then she stood. "I'm so sorry," she said, loud enough for the microphone on the stage to pick it up. "There must have been a miscommunication. Zinnia offered, she practically begged, to take this on. We didn't force her." The slide changed again. This time, it showed the thank you card draft, the one with her signature. My name, of course, wasn't on it. Indira stepped up to the stage. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. "This entire event," she said into the mic, "was funded by the woman you tried to erase." The tent went completely silent. Cressida stood, too, mouth slightly open. "This is not the time, Indira." "No," Indira replied. "It wasn't the time when you took credit. But now is." Avon scoffed, but there was a crack in her voice. "She's playing victim. That's what this is. We asked her for help, and she said yes. No one forced her. Don't let her rewrite this." And that's when I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence in the room made every word echo. "I didn't beg," I said. "I believed." I let that hang there, let it sting. Then I added, "And that's what you took advantage of." Avon sat down. I walked to the mic. Everyone watched. Some people looked sorry. Others didn't know what to feel. I didn't care anymore. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. I opened my purse, took out the manila envelope, and placed it gently on the podium. Then I stepped down, removed my heels, and walked barefoot out the side of the tent. The grass was cool. The night had finally cooled with it. I felt the dew settle between my toes as the music kicked back up behind me. They tried to recover, tried to pretend the evening hadn't just been peeled open like an old wound. But it had. I didn't need applause. I didn't need to shout. The receipts had already spoken. I took off my shoes, and I left the stage. I sat in the back seat of Leora's car, watching the tail end of the reception dissolve into forced laughter and disappearing guests. My heels were off, my phone warm in my hand from all the messages coming in. She passed me her iced coffee from the cup holder without a word. I took a sip, cold and sharp, then tapped my screen open. The video was already at 30,000 views. It had been posted by a distant cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The caption read, "Bride's sister caught mocking the real star of the show. Yikes." In the clip, Avon stood by the dessert table, hair pristine, drink in hand. She laughed as she turned to a group of bridesmaids and said, "Zinnia's so dramatic. Honestly, she should thank us for making her look presentable." A few of them chuckled. One rolled her eyes. The laughter sounded like nails on tile. I watched it 3 times. Comments poured in. "Wait, this is the sister she erased? She planned and paid for the wedding and gets this? Family can be the most dangerous people in your life." I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The world was doing the math. I just leaned back against the headrest and watched the numbers climb. By nightfall, I was back in my apartment. It had never felt more like home. The quiet was clean. No voices, no laughter that wasn't mine. Then came the knock. I opened the door to find a delivery courier holding a large box with shiny wrapping. He looked bored. "Return package. Address couldn't be verified at recipient's end," he said, handing me the scanner. I signed and took the box inside. It was the luxury cookware Avon had shown off during brunch. I recognized the set. Custom handles, French enamel, the works. She had held it up like it was a gift from royalty. On the shipping label was my name. The charge had hit my account over a month ago. I didn't even open the box. I snapped a photo of the return label, zoomed in on the Sender Z Martin section, and forwarded it to Indira. No caption. She'd know what it meant. Then I placed the box near my front door and poured myself a cup of tea. The next morning, while wiping down the counter, a news notification flashed across my lock screen. "Bride erases sister's role. Internet reacts after slideshow expose." Below it, a thumbnail from the video. My name in bold. My photo, not cropped out this time. I tapped the article. It was clean, factual. No slander, no exaggeration. Just a summary of receipts, screenshots, testimonies, and what the internet had pieced together from fragments and whispers. One comment at the bottom stood out. "She didn't ruin the wedding, she revealed it." I placed the phone down, picked up my tea again. It had stayed warm. It took an online scandal to prove what I knew in silence. It was raining softly outside my apartment the morning after the headline dropped. The kind of drizzle that lingers, quiet and slow, as if even the sky was holding its breath. I woke to my phone buzzing, not from texts, but from notifications, tagged posts, message requests, a few follow alerts from bridal accounts I'd never interacted with. I didn't click on any of them. I went straight to the group chat my mother still insisted on calling the Martin Circle. Avon had posted a carousel to her Instagram just before midnight. I hadn't seen it until now. The first photo was of the venue entrance, the second a staged shot of her holding a clipboard, and the caption read, "Coordinating my sister's dream wedding was the hardest thing I've ever done, but so worth it. Thank you to everyone who helped bring my vision to life." Her vision, no mention of me, no photo of me, not even a blurry one from behind. I closed the app and sat for a moment in the silence, letting the low hum of my refrigerator be the only sound in the room. Then I stood, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder labeled Receipts. Click, screenshot, Click, invoice, click, floral contract, catering deposit, branded signage, the monogrammed napkins she insisted we didn't need, but then gushed about when guests complimented them. I opened my photo editor, dragged the files into a collage layout, and typed just 2 words at the top of the image. A reminder. No tags, no hashtags, no filter. I uploaded it. 5 minutes later, it had 143 shares, then 600. Comments ranged from, "Wait, she paid?" to, "This is the quietest mic drop I've ever witnessed." I made myself a fresh cup of coffee, black, and stepped onto the balcony. The drizzle had stopped. Everything smelled like wet stone and eucalyptus. I didn't feel victorious exactly, just steady. That afternoon, I met Leora at our usual cafe. She walked in holding a white envelope. "I got this in the mail," she said, handing it to me. "Thought you should see it." It was a thank you card. Elegant print, gold foil edges, soft, pink border. "Thank you for attending and supporting our vision." Signed, Avon Cressida. My name, the person who invited Leora, who paid for the printing company that produced these cards, was nowhere to be found. "You paid for this, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded once. "I paid," I said quietly, "to be invisible." Leora didn't say anything after that. She just held my hand across the table for a minute. The weight of it said everything. Back home, I left the card on the kitchen counter. I didn't rip it up. I didn't toss it. I let it sit, untouched, like a page from a book I'd finally stopped reading. That night, before bed, I turned off all the lights, left my phone face down on the charger, and walked to the window. I opened it just a few inches to let the air in, then sat at my desk. And my laptop glowed, the screen still on. I scrolled through the comments again. One stood out. They erased her name. She carved her initials into the truth. I closed the laptop and smiled, small, not smug, just enough to acknowledge the shift inside me. The applause had never been mine, but now the silence finally was. The world had gone quiet in the days after the fallout. Not silent, just hushed, like a room after someone slams a door, but no one moves to reopen it. No one from the Martin side had reached out. Not Avon, not Cressida. Not even a half-hearted message from a cousin trying to check in while pretending not to pick a side. My inbox was empty of apologies, my voicemail clean. It was the kind of silence that felt louder than noise. I was on my balcony when the call came. The sun had just started slipping behind the hills, and the air carried that soft, late-summer warmth. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Zinnia?" His voice was slower than I remembered, lined with something unspoken. "It's Dad." I sat back in the patio chair, my body suddenly still. "I saw it," he said. "All of it." He didn't elaborate, didn't mention the headlines or the video or the receipts. He didn't have to. "I should have stepped in," he added after a pause. "I didn't." "I'm sorry." The word hung in the air, simple, without theatrics. I felt my throat tighten, but not in the way it used to. I wasn't choking on sadness this time. It was something else. The surprise of being seen, just once, and by someone I least expected. "Thanks," I said, quietly. "You're the only one who has." He cleared his throat. "I don't have answers, but I want to do better, if that means anything." "It does," I said, and meant it. "Even if it's late." We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. Sometimes the smallest voice becomes the loudest memory. The next day, I met Leora for lunch at the same cafe we always went to. Nothing fancy, just a shaded patio and the clatter of silverware from other people's lives. She waited until the food arrived before she said, "I knew it was coming. I just didn't know how far they'd go." I nodded. I kept hoping they'd prove me wrong. They never did. "No," I said, stirring my iced tea. "They just proved I should have left sooner." She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "You handled it better than I would have," she said, "with more grace than they deserved." I smiled at that, not the practiced kind, but a real one. The kind that didn't hurt. We didn't stay long. The conversation flowed easily, not because we avoided the pain, but because we didn't let it anchor us. Back at my apartment, I sat on the couch and opened the family group chat. I didn't delete it. I archived it, not out of sentiment, but because sometimes keeping the evidence is its own kind of closure. Then I walked into my office. The wedding vision board still hung there, covered in photos, swatches, pinned up plans that never really belonged to me. I stood in front of it for a long time before gently taking each pin out, each corner of paper, each layer of false hope. I folded it all together and placed it in a drawer. In its place, I hung a simple white frame. Inside was a printed quote in soft gray letters. "You don't need their applause to validate your presence." I stood back and looked at it. I didn't burn the bridge, I just walked off it. The studio smelled like cardboard, ink, and jasmine. I'd lit a new candle that morning, nothing fancy, just something clean, and the calmness in the air felt earned. I sat cross-legged on the floor, taping shut the last box of photo books for shipment. The cover read, "The wedding that wasn't mine, but I paid for it." I hadn't written the book out of anger. It wasn't some scorched earth memoir or rage essay dressed in wedding white. It was truth, printed and bound, screenshots, invoices, silent photos, captions that never mentioned me, words they deleted, faces they cropped. Indira had texted that morning. "It's everywhere. The receipts, the coverage. Even a bridal trends blog picked it up, called it the unspoken labor of wedding scapegoats." I stared at her message for a while before I replied. Good. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. This wasn't about punishment, it was about record keeping. Across the studio, my laptop chimed with a new email. The subject line read, "Inquiry, speaking event, post-wedding recovery family estrangement." The sender was from a university. I didn't smile, but I didn't feel small either. By noon, I met Leora for lunch. Same cafe, same table. She brought me a copy of the Santa Barbara Weekly, folded in half, circled in red pen like she was still in high school. Page 6. Luxury event brand drops bride amid public backlash over misattributed expenses. Beneath it, a photo of Avon, unfiltered, no gloss. The quote from the company was short. "We do not condone misrepresentation of contributions at our events." I read it out loud, then leaned back in my chair, my fingers tracing the condensation on my glass. "Now that," Leora said, grinning, "that's a real bouquet toss." We laughed, deep from the belly, not bitter, not smug, just light. I spent the next 2 days packing up my apartment, not because I was running, because I'd outgrown the space. The place had held too much silence, too many conversations I rehearsed, but never had. It was time. The new place was a cottage, small, near the sea, with chipped paint and wild lavender out front. I didn't need more than that. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. Books went on the shelf in the order I actually read them. Candles on the counter, a soft rug by the front door. I didn't hang any family photos. On my new desk, I placed one thing. A framed card with a message I'd designed myself. You are the foundation they tried to build without. That night, I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had started an article the week before, one that had no deadline, no expected submission, just something I needed to write. The title, On Choosing Silence Over Spectacle. I typed the last line and let it sit there for a beat. I wasn't a villain. I just stopped being their plot device. The screen glowed warm in the dim room. Outside, the sea whispered through cracked open windows. I leaned back, exhaled. If I had to vanish to be remembered, so be it. They needed an audience. I needed peace,